Even though Rome dominated Greece with military force and political power, it was Greek culture that ironically conquered the Romans. Instead of imposing its own culture, Rome absorbed and adopted what the Greek civilization had created. That influence profoundly reshaped Roman identity and culture. But how did the Greeks manage to dominate the Romans with their culture? That's what we're going to see in this video. Greece's influence on Rome began in a far subtler and deeper way than through arms and battles. Even before the two peoples confronted each other directly, Greek culture was already seeping into the Roman world via the colonies established in the south of the Italian peninsula and in Sicily, a region known as Magna Graecia. There, cities like Tarentum and Syracuse flourished, centers that breathed commerce, art, philosophy, and science. For the Romans, who were still consolidating themselves as a regional power, these cities were viewed with a mix of admiration and apprehension. On one hand, there was the fascination with the sophistication and cultural wealth radiating from those colonies. On the other, the caution of those who recognized the political and military strength those centers also represented. But the Romans did not have to wait for direct contact to begin absorbing elements of Greek culture. This process also occurred indirectly through the Etruscans, their neighbors to the north. The Etruscans maintained close ties with the Greek cities, which meant that many features of Hellenic civilization reached Rome filtered through them. Writing, for example, which the Etruscans had inherited from the Greeks, was adapted and passed on to the Romans, forming the basis of the Latin alphabet. The same happened with certain styles of art and architecture, and above all with myths and religious traditions. This cultural interchange ended up shaping some of the most enduring foundations of Roman civilization. In religion, the Romans began to identify their own deities with the Greek ones. For many Romans, entering cities like Tarentum, Cumae, or Syracuse meant encountering a reality very different from what they were used to in Rome. There, temples honored gods such as Apollo, Athena, and Heracles, whom the Romans would call Hercules. These cities, founded centuries earlier, were prosperous, sophisticated, and full of monuments that revealed the grandeur of Hellenic civilization. Upon arriving in these places, whether on military missions or in commercial activity, the Romans were inevitably struck by what they saw and experienced. The myths and stories associated with those deities, conveyed through sculpture, painting, and oral narratives, quickly aroused Roman interest. Familiarity with those tales helped shape a kind of cultural translation in which Roman gods came to be identified with Greek ones. Thus, Hercules became an admired hero in Rome, not only for his strength, but also for the symbolism the Greeks had attached to him. The same happened with Jupiter, assimilated to Zeus, and with other gods who came to occupy central places in the Roman Pantheon. The great turning point in the relationship between Rome and Greece occurred during the so-called Macedonian Wars, fought between 214 BC and 148 BC. By then, Rome had already consolidated its power in the Italian peninsula, and above all had emerged victorious against Carthage in the Punic Wars, which made it a power in the Western Mediterranean. With that threat eliminated, the Romans turned their eyes eastward, where the Hellenic world was dominated by kingdoms that had arisen after the death of Alexander the Great. Macedonia, in particular, was seen as one of Rome's principal rivals in the quest for regional supremacy. One of the most striking episodes in this process was the Battle of Cynocephalae in 197 BC. There, the Roman general Titus Quinctius Flamininus faced the Macedonian army and won a decisive victory. The battle was significant not only for its military outcome, but also because it symbolized the clash between two warrior traditions. On one side, the Macedonian phalanx, heir to the tactics of Philip II and Alexander. On the other, the more flexible and adaptable Roman legions. The Roman triumph demonstrated in practice the superiority of Rome's military organization and paved the way for the definitive weakening of Macedonian power. What made that victory even more notable was Flamininus's political gesture. The following year, in 196 BC, during the Isthmian Games at Corinth, he made a public declaration that astonished the entire Greek world. He announced the so-called freedom of the Greeks, proclaiming that the Hellenic city-states would be free and autonomous. For the Greeks, accustomed to the dominion of great kingdoms and often to the loss of independence, this message sounded almost like a dream come true. Crowds celebrated Flamininus as a liberator, and Rome gained for a time prestige and trust among the Hellenic peoples. The Battle of Pydna in 168 BC marked one of the most important moments in the relationship between Rome and Greece. It was there that Macedonia was definitively defeated. This victory consolidated Rome's hegemony in the Eastern Mediterranean and opened the way for a profound cultural transformation. The impact was not limited to the military sphere. After the battle, thousands of Greeks were taken to Rome as prisoners. Among them, figures of great intellectual prominence, such as the historian Polybius. Unlike other conquered peoples, the Greeks were valued not only as a labor force, but also for their knowledge. Many of these hostages became teachers, physicians, philosophers, and artists in the service of the Roman elite. And it was precisely through them that Greek culture began to spread intensely within Roman society. This phenomenon had far-reaching consequences. Young Romans from the wealthiest families began to be educated by Greek tutors, learning not only to read and write, but also philosophy, rhetoric, and history. Little by little, the Greek way of thinking and living became part of Roman daily life. This influence helped shape generations of leaders who, though politically Roman, bore a deeply Hellenic intellectual formation. Medicine, art, literature, and even Greek theater began to become part of the Roman world, making Rome a direct heir to Greece's cultural tradition. If the Battle of Pydna symbolized military victory and the mass arrival of Greek intellectuals in Rome, the Sack of Corinth in 146 BC clearly represented the final end of Greek independence. The Roman general Lucius Mummius Achaicus led the city's destruction, which was brutally razed. But more than physical violence, what marked history was the systematic plundering of works of art, sculptures, manuscripts, and cultural treasures. These pieces carefully taken to Rome were seen not merely as spoils of war, but as symbols of prestige and sophistication. From that moment on, Roman generals and aristocrats became passionate collectors of Greek art. Owning Hellenic statues, paintings, and manuscripts became a mark of social status, something that displayed refinement and power. The Roman historian Livy recorded how military and political leaders competed with one another to display their collections, turning the taste for Greek art into a true fashion among the Roman elites. Thus, Greece, even conquered and subdued, dominated Rome in another way, through culture. From the 1st century BC onward, Rome was no longer just a military power that had conquered Greece. It was also an enthusiastic heir to its cultural tradition. The absorption of Greek culture ceased to be a mere detail of Roman daily life and became the driving force of the city's intellectual and artistic life. Hellenic influence was everywhere, from literature to philosophy, from the arts to architecture, shaping a civilization that prided itself on its political power, but also recognized the value of the Greek legacy as a source of prestige and sophistication. In literature, the impact was immediate and profound. Roman authors did not settle for simply translating Greek texts. They adapted, reinvented, and gave them new meaning. A celebrated example is the poet Virgil, whose epic, the Aeneid, was written directly under the inspiration of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Virgil did not merely imitate. He reinvented, connecting the Greeks' mythic past to the glorious destiny Rome believed it was fated to fulfill. The hero Aeneas, the work's central figure, carried within him both the echo of the Homeric tradition and the symbol of Rome's mission to conquer and civilize. Other writers also drank from that well. The playwrights Plautus and Terence adapted comedies by the Greek Menander, bringing to Roman stages stories of family intrigue and comic situations that delighted audiences. Poets such as Horace, with his refined lyric, and intellectuals such as Cicero, the master orator, took inspiration from the forms and techniques of Greek poets and rhetorics, but with a distinctive style that reflected the Roman spirit. In philosophy, Greek influence was even more decisive. The great currents of Hellenic thought, Stoicism and Epicureanism, came to be adopted by the Roman elite as guides for life and reflection. Stoicism, with its focus on virtue and mastery of the passions, appealed to many Roman leaders who saw in it a model of moral discipline compatible with public life. Epicureanism, advocating the pursuit of tranquility and moderate pleasure, also found a place among intellectuals seeking a more balanced life. Among the Romans, the name that stands out most in this field is Cicero. Considered the greatest orator of his time, he studied in Athens and absorbed Greek philosophy deeply, using it to formulate ideas on morality, justice, and politics that would influence generations. Roman education, especially for the sons of the wealthiest families, came to include travel and study in Greek cities such as Athens and Rhodes, where they learned not only philosophy, but also the language and values of the Hellenic tradition. Art and architecture also clearly show how Rome was shaped by Greece. Many Roman sculptures known today are in fact marble copies of Greek masterpieces originally cast in
Greek
bronze
style
and melted down over
remained
time.
alive.
The Romans so admired these creations that they strove to reproduce them, ensuring that Greek style and beauty remained alive. In architecture, Rome brought its own innovations, such as the use of arches and domes, but never abandoned the aesthetics inherited from Greece. Roman temples were adorned with columns in the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian styles. The classical orders developed by the Greeks that became symbols of architectural elegance. This blend of practical Roman engineering and Greek formal beauty produced constructions that still astonish today, such as the Pantheon and the Great Forums. Thus, Greek influence not only enriched Roman culture, it transformed it completely, shaping its gods, its laws, and its ideas about the world. Thus, Greece even conquered and subdued, dominated Rome in another way, through culture. From the 1st century BC onward, Rome was no longer just a military power that had conquered Greece. It was also an enthusiastic heir to its cultural tradition. The absorption of Greek culture ceased to be a mere detail of Roman daily life and became the driving force of the city's intellectual and artistic life. Hellenic influence was everywhere, from literature to philosophy, from the arts to architecture, shaping a civilization that prided itself on its political power, but also recognized the value of the Greek legacy as a source of prestige and sophistication. In literature, the impact was immediate and profound. Roman authors did not settle for simply translating Greek texts. They adapted, reinvented, and gave them new meaning. A celebrated example is the poet Virgil, whose epic, the Aeneid, was written directly under the inspiration of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Virgil did not merely imitate. He reinvented, connecting the Greeks' mythic past to the glorious destiny Rome believed it was fated to fulfill. The hero Aeneas